There comes a moment in every connection, especially one touched by avoidance, when silence speaks louder than words. When someone with an avoidant pattern realizes they've lost you, the shift doesn't always explode like fireworks. It doesn't scream, it doesn't chase. Instead, it appears in subtle, almost invisible behaviors that reveal more truth than any grand gesture ever could. Avoidants aren't heartless, they aren't unfeeling. In fact, many of them feel deeply, sometimes so deeply that closeness becomes overwhelming. So when they know they've lost you, they move through a quiet emotional storm they rarely admit to. You may not see tears, you may not get confessions, but their actions reveal the impact of your absence. They replay conversations in their mind, even if they'd never admit it. They check your profile, even while pretending they've moved on. They rewrite the story to convince themselves that distance was necessary, even though a part of them aches for the comfort your presence brought. Their pride protects them and their fear controls them. But inside, they know something valuable slipped through their fingers. When they realize you're no longer waiting, something powerful happens. They suddenly feel the weight of the space they created. They notice the stability, warmth, and emotional safety you once offered, now replaced by an emptiness they don't know how to fill. Avoidants often learn the value of a relationship only in its absence. It's not because they didn't care. It's because caring forces them to sit with emotions they spent their life avoiding. So don't mistake their quietness for indifference. Don't confuse their lack of pursuit with not feeling anything. Some people grieve privately. Some people recognize their loss only when the door has closed for good. And sometimes losing someone becomes the moment an avoidant confronts themselves for the first time. If you've walked away from someone who treated closeness like a battlefield, understand this. You didn't lose them. They lost the version of themselves they could have become with you. And if they ever return, it won't be because they suddenly transformed. It will be because losing you pushed them to face something inside themselves they've ignored for years. Whether you choose to reopen the door or keep it closed, remember this: your value doesn't increase when someone finally sees it. You are valuable the whole time. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stop waiting for those who only learn love through loss. When an avoidant person realizes they've lost someone who mattered to them, their instinctive response is to retreat even further into themselves, and this often gets misunderstood as coldness or indifference. In reality, their withdrawal is rarely about not caring. It's about not knowing how to handle the tidal wave of emotions that losing someone can trigger inside them. Avoidants are wired to protect themselves from emotional overwhelm. They grew up learning that vulnerability equals danger, that expressing needs or wanting closeness opens the door to rejection or disappointment. So when they sense emotional intensity, whether it's love, conflict, or loss, their reflex is to pull back behind the walls they've spent years perfecting. When they realize you're gone, they don't move toward you, they move deeper into that internal bunker where they can process on their own terms. Inside that retreat, they're not numb, they're conflicted. They feel the loss, but they don't feel equipped to deal with it out loud. Instead of saying, "I miss you," they analyze it quietly. Instead of reaching out for connection, they try to regulate themselves by reducing emotional stimuli, which often means avoiding conversations, avoiding reminders, or avoiding any situation that forces them to confront what happened. It's not that they don't replay memories. They do. It's not that they don't wonder whether they made a mistake. They almost always do. But the intensity of those feelings tends to overwhelm them. And the only tool they know for dealing with overwhelm is distance. And so paradoxically, the more they care, the more they retreat. This retreat can look like silence, like a disappearance, like a sudden shift from warm to cold. It can come across as if they've erased the relationship from their mind. But that's not how it works internally. Many avoidants actually think deeply and obsessively after a loss. They just don't express it outwardly. They can spend hours replaying conversations, analyzing moments when they felt pressured, misunderstood, or exposed. They might even feel guilt or regret, but those emotions translate into withdrawal rather than outreach. It's easier for them to shut down than to show up. And because they struggle to articulate their emotional world, even to themselves, they often don't know how to handle the mixture of sadness, fear, and confusion that hits them when they realize you aren't coming back. Another piece of this retreat involves self-protection. Avoidants often fear that if they express vulnerability, they'll lose control or appear needy. They've spent so long convincing themselves that independence is their safety zone that reaching out feels like a threat to their identity. So even if a part of them wants to contact you to ask if things could be repaired, another part shuts that impulse down immediately. They tell themselves they're better off without complications. They convince themselves that distancing keeps them strong. They hide behind rationality because feelings feel too dangerous to manage. Their retreat doesn't mean they didn't value you. It means they don't know how to fight for something emotionally significant without feeling like they're losing themselves. And so, when faced with loss, they choose the familiar discomfort of distance over the terrifying unfamiliarity of vulnerability. When an avoidant realizes they've lost you, one of the most telling behaviors, though you may never see it directly, is the way they begin monitoring your life from a distance. Avoidants are experts at staying emotionally hidden. They rarely make bold moves, rarely initiate difficult conversations, and almost never admit when they're hurting. But what they avoid in direct communication, they make up for in quiet observation. They might not reach out, but they keep a subtle, almost invisible connection to you, checking in without ever appearing to. This form of distant monitoring allows them to feel close enough to reduce the sting of loss, but far enough not to risk vulnerability or rejection. They might scroll through your social media late at night, not to engage, but to reassure themselves you're still familiar, that you haven't completely forgotten them. They pay attention to your posts, your stories, the changes in your tone, or the faces you appear with. They don't like admitting that they care, even internally, so they frame it as curiosity or habit. But underneath, it's an emotional tether, small, silent, and controlled. An avoidant's biggest fear isn't usually losing someone, it's being pulled into emotions they can't manage. So instead of reaching out and risking a response they're not ready to face, they watch from a safe emotional distance. What makes this behavior complex is the duality inside them. They want to know how you're doing, but they don't want to be seen wanting that. They want reassurance that they still matter somehow, but they resist the urge to ask. They want to understand where they stand, but they don't want to expose their own feelings. So they operate in the background, gathering emotional information without having to participate in the relationship directly. This allows them to maintain a sense of control. It protects their ego because they can monitor your life without putting themselves in a position to be rejected or confronted. They might also quietly ask mutual friends about you, but in a way that seems casual or detached. They'll disguise their curiosity with comments like, "How is everyone doing these days?" or "Have you seen her around?" They're careful to sound unfazed, as if they're simply making conversation, because showing direct concern feels too vulnerable. But underneath that detached tone is a desire for reassurance. Reassurance that you're okay, that the connection mattered, that losing you wasn't just a quiet vanishing that they didn't notice soon enough. Their silent monitoring is a way of managing the discomfort of loss without confronting it head on. Avoidants prefer emotional safety over emotional honesty, so they stay in the shadows where they can observe without being observed. This distance creates an illusion of control. It allows them to maintain emotional proximity without facing the rawness of regret or longing. What hurts them most is not knowing what they feel, and what scares them most is revealing it. So watching from afar becomes a coping strategy, a way to stay connected without stepping outside the boundaries that make them feel secure. When an avoidant person realizes they've lost someone important, one of the most common ways they cope is by rewriting the narrative of the relationship in their mind. This isn't necessarily conscious or manipulative. It's a defense mechanism, a way to protect themselves from facing feelings they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Avoidants often struggle with emotional intensity, and loss magnifies that intensity. By reframing the story, they can create a mental version of events that feels safer, less painful, and easier to manage. They might convince themselves that the relationship wasn't right or that it was bound to end anyway, even if deep down they know they could have done things differently. This internal storytelling allows them to maintain the illusion of control and avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about their own behavior. They often focus on perceived flaws, incompatibilities, or unmet needs as justification for the separation. In their mind, the breakup becomes a logical choice rather than an emotional failure. This rewriting of reality allows them to feel less vulnerable because admitting that they truly lost someone meaningful would force them to face their own fears of intimacy, inadequacy, or rejection. It is easier for them to externalize the reasons for the loss rather than looking inward. By blaming circumstances, timing, or even the other person's actions, they can distance themselves from guilt, regret, and vulnerability. In a sense, the narrative becomes a protective shield, a way to survive emotionally without having to experience the full impact of loss. This self-created story often comes with a selective memory. Avoidants tend to emphasize moments of difficulty, conflict, or discomfort while downplaying the warmth, connection, and joy that existed. By highlighting what went wrong and ignoring what was good, they convince themselves that walking away was not only justified, but necessary. This selective memory isn't about deception, it's about survival. Facing the emotional truth would require them to confront feelings they are unprepared to handle, and rewriting the narrative gives them the illusion of emotional safety while keeping those feelings at bay. At the same time, avoidants may also idealize their own detachment. They might tell themselves they were strong for leaving or that they maintained independence in the face of emotional intensity. This allows them to maintain their self-image, which is crucial for someone whose identity is often tied to being in control and self-sufficient. They craft a version of the story that minimizes their own vulnerabilities, avoids emotional exposure, and justifies their distance, all while internally wrestling with the subtle sting of regret they are reluctant to acknowledge. Even when they appear unaffected on the outside, this mental rewriting consumes a lot of energy. They analyze conversations, replay moments of perceived failure, and try to reconcile their desire for connection with their fear of closeness. By constructing this internal narrative, avoidants can manage their inner chaos without having to express it outwardly. It becomes a coping mechanism that allows them to feel some measure of stability and control, even when the emotional truth, losing someone they cared about, presses heavily beneath the surface. Avoidants often do not recognize the true value of a relationship until the other person has fully detached. They are accustomed to keeping distance, maintaining control, and avoiding emotional intensity, which makes it difficult for them to truly appreciate the comfort, stability, and warmth someone provides while they are still present. When you are actively available, checking in, giving your attention, showing patience, they may take it for granted, seeing it as a constant they don't need to fight for or cherish. But once that presence disappears, once you stop initiating contact and withdraw your emotional energy, the absence becomes undeniable. The void left behind is a stark reminder of the stability and connection they once had but never fully acknowledged. This delayed realization is tied to their fear of vulnerability. Avoidants often equate closeness with losing control or being overwhelmed. While someone is still emotionally present, they may unconsciously downplay its importance, convincing themselves that distance is preferable or that they are unaffected. They resist engagement because the emotional demands feel too heavy. But the moment that support, attention, and understanding vanish, the emotional truth hits. They have lost something irreplaceable, and no mental narrative or self-protective rationalization can fill the gap entirely. The comfort they once overlooked now becomes painfully clear in its absence. The emotional impact is intensified because avoidants are not used to fully confronting their feelings. When the person they lost steps back completely, they are forced, at least internally, to face the discomfort they have long avoided. The feelings of regret, longing, and missed opportunity surface in ways that can feel overwhelming. Suddenly, they are left with space to reflect, and reflection reveals patterns they may have previously ignored, the times they pulled away unnecessarily, the moments they failed to communicate, the ways their defenses kept someone they cared about at arm's length. It is often only in this quiet aftermath, when the person is no longer waiting or hoping, that they gain clarity about the significance of the relationship. Avoidants may attempt to reconcile these feelings by analyzing what was lost and imagining what could have been. They might recognize the stability, emotional safety, and consistent care you offered, qualities they may not have fully valued while they were still present. The absence becomes a mirror, showing them what they overlooked, highlighting both the emotional depth of the connection and their own limitations in engaging with it. It is a painful, silent lesson in recognizing that relationships require presence, vulnerability, and effort, things they often resist until the consequences of their avoidance are unavoidable. This moment of awareness can be transformative, but it is not always guaranteed to result in change. Some avoidants may internalize the lesson and use it to adjust future behavior, while others simply mourn the loss quietly without altering their patterns. Regardless, the key turning point is the clear absence of the person they lost. Only when your emotional energy is no longer accessible do they truly confront the reality of what they gave up, realizing that the comfort and connection they once dismissed were, in fact, deeply meaningful. It is in this space of absence that avoidants often face the truth they resisted while you were still present. When an avoidant realizes they lost someone important, there is a possibility they may try to return, but it's important to understand the motivation behind their return. Unlike someone who has taken time to genuinely reflect and grow, an avoidance return is often triggered not by personal transformation, but by the discomfort of absence. They may experience the sting of missing you, the emptiness that comes from your departure, and a sudden awareness of the stability, warmth, or consistency you provided. However, this awareness does not automatically translate into the ability to handle intimacy differently. The return is often more about seeking familiarity or emotional relief than about committing to real change or growth. Avoidants are wired to protect themselves from vulnerability, and when they come back, it's usually with caution. They may try to re-establish contact subtly, testing the waters to see if the connection is still available, without fully risking themselves emotionally. They may send a casual message, check in indirectly, or create situations where interaction seems natural. But underlying these actions is often a desire to regain comfort, rather than an intention to build a healthier dynamic. They may long for the closeness they avoided before, but only as long as it doesn't require them to confront the fears and patterns that led to the initial distance. The challenge with an avoidance return is that it can be confusing for the person on the receiving end. Their actions may appear heartfelt or genuine on the surface, but it is crucial to observe whether there is evidence of real self-awareness or willingness to change. Avoidants rarely abandon their defense mechanisms overnight. They might acknowledge the past casually, express regret in a measured way, or promise to do better, yet deep-seated patterns of avoidance often remain intact. They may be willing to resume connection, but without addressing the root issues: fear of vulnerability, discomfort with emotional intimacy, and difficulty expressing feelings. The cycle of distance and return can repeat. When an avoidant comes back, the responsibility often falls on the other person to set boundaries and assess whether re-engaging is wise. It is essential to recognize that their return does not automatically validate the worth of your past patience or sacrifice, nor does it guarantee a healthier relationship. Sometimes they are drawn back by familiarity, nostalgia, or the emotional ease that comes from a known connection. They may be craving reassurance, comfort, or the emotional security that your presence provides without being willing to confront their own shortcomings or patterns. However, there is a potential for growth if an avoidance return coincides with genuine self-reflection. Rarely, the loss may prompt them to confront their fear of intimacy, acknowledge past mistakes, and actively work on cultivating emotional availability. When that happens, their return can be an opportunity to build a more balanced and conscious connection. But distinguishing between return for comfort versus return for growth requires careful observation and firm boundaries. Recognizing the motives behind their actions is critical to protecting your emotional well-being and ensuring that you do not repeat cycles that left you feeling unseen, undervalued, or emotionally drained. Ultimately, an avoidance return is not a guarantee of lasting change. It is a nuanced moment, blending longing, self-preservation, and reflection. Understanding that their motives may be rooted in the discomfort of absence rather than genuine transformation empowers you to navigate the situation with clarity, maintain your boundaries, and choose what truly serves your growth and emotional health. In the end, understanding what avoidants do when they realize they've lost you teaches us an important lesson about self-worth, boundaries, and emotional awareness. Their silence, withdrawal, and subtle monitoring are not reflections of your value, but of their patterns and fears. Recognizing these behaviors allows us to honor our own needs, protect our hearts, and appreciate that sometimes walking away is the most powerful choice for both growth and clarity. Thank you all for listening and for taking the time to reflect on the dynamics of relationships, the importance of emotional honesty, and the courage it takes to prioritize yourself in the face of loss.